Have you ever experienced being humiliated, ashamed, and felt betrayed? Overwhelmingly confused and asking yourself whys and hows with no answers? Just feeling the need to be alone and cry yourself out to calm down? But also at the same time, feeling the need to look like you're okay? Job Hunting is an extract taken from E.R.Braithwaite's famous autobiographical work To Serve with Love. Job hunting describes the anguish and the emotional turmoil and the sense of humiliation of the educated blacks who became a victim of the prejudiced and racial society of the post-war British. The main theme through and through is racism. E.R.Braithwaite served as a pilot at the Royal Air Force. During the Second World War, he faced no discrimination at the Royal Air Force regarding his skin color or ethnicity. When the Second World War got over, he was told by an interviewing officer that a person of his caliber would find job easily. Braithwaite was a well-qualified person with degree in science, experience in engineering technology, specialized in electronics. War was over. He was discharged of his duty as a pilot and started living with Mr. and Mrs. Belmont, an elderly couple who professed to be atheist. But Braithwaite says that by judging by the way they conduct themselves, their behavior and their attitude, it seemed like they exhibit all the good attributes that are supposed to be in a good Christian. Braithwaite also had a 2 years experience in communication engineer for the Standard Oil Company of the Aruba oil refinery. He was informed that he could drop in for interviews for 3 different firms or companies that required qualified communications engineers. He applied for all the posts in the 3 firms and received positive, encouraging replies. He felt on top of the world. He was educated, he was qualified, and he was going to contribute his useful service to the society. And a person of his caliber, a person of his qualification was greatly in demand. He took pains to deal with his looks. He dressed well and headed for the interview in one of the firms at Mayfair. Now, this firm was a high international reputed firm. As he walked into the head office, he met the receptionist and he told the receptionist that, "My name is Braithwaite and I'm here for an interview with Mr. Simons." Her smile disappeared. She suddenly seemed angry out of nowhere, avoided looking at him in the face. He was led into a room where there were foremen waiting and they asked him various questions about his birthplace, about his experience at the RAF, telecommunication, electronics, etc. Braithwaite was very confident and enjoyed talking about the familiar subject. At the end of the interview, they came to a conclusion saying that they were very pleased to have met him, but it would be unfair to put many Englishmen under his authority, and also there were other vacancies, but he was way too educated to fit into those vacancies. He was utterly confused. He had a very nice interview with them. He was confident and he knew his subjects well, and he responded very well. He was very satisfied with his answers, but suddenly they said that it would not be fair to put him in charge. He was utterly confused but managed to politely get out of the office. He kept on walking with a heavy head and heavy heart. He was brought face to face with something that he had forgotten all these exciting 6 years. The fact that he had black skin. He thought about the time that he volunteered for the air crew in 1940. It did not matter. His black skin did not matter during the time of training. It did not matter during his service at the RAF, Royal Air Force. He had always seen his black skin in the mirror, but it never mattered to him until now. Now, as he was walking away from the office and when he saw his reflection, he says, disappointment and resentment were a solid, bitter, raising lump inside me. He hurried to the public toilet and felt very low. He felt violently sick. He tried to calm himself down and walk back home to Mr. and Mrs. Belmont in Brentwood, a place which he describes as the only place where he felt safe and secure. On his way, he realized that the whole interview was nothing but a waste of time. The receptionist ignored him because of his skin color. Mr. Simons and his colleagues agreed not to hire him because he was black. And all the beautiful invitations to the interview was because they had no idea that Mr. Braithwaite was black. So he called up to the other two firms and made sure that they knew that he was a black guy. And much to his expectation, they turned his candidature down, saying that they had already hired someone else. He truly felt humiliated and betrayed. Belief in an ideal dies hard, he says. For 28 years, he spent his days believing the ideal British way of life. He had always believed that the Britons were identified for their fairness, tolerance, and freedom. It was for this reason that he was even ready to lay down his life for British. About racism in post-war Britain, he says that the Britons who lived in England had no idea what the British way life meant to the colonial people. How the colonial people looked up at the British way of life. The colonial people would proudly quote the British system of law, education, and government, adopt their fashion sense and social codes. They try to talk and walk like the British. Braithwaite says, yes, it is wonderful to be British until one comes to Britain. People try to earn their way to come to England, believing that British stands for all that is best in both Christian and democracy. He was no different. He taught himself the English literature, poetry, prose, classical and contemporary. He even preferred British to the Americans, and he would defend the British while arguing with the Americans. But now, he was realizing that racism had been a common practice in Britain. A black man has always been called a darky or a nigger or a black, and associates them with inexhaustible brute strength, like a powerful beast. They would use phrases like working like a nigger or laboring like a black. I am black, and what happened at the interview was a betrayal of faith, he says. Because he had always believed in the British principles of freedom, democracy, and human rights. But now he realized that those looked good. Those looked good only in books. It was never practiced. Then he shamefully thinks about his pride in the British. He reflected about his life in America. If the white Americans criticized the black Americans, the blacks equally would argue and put up a fight against the white Americans, and then they would earn their way, earn their position. Whereas racial discrimination in British was different. It was done in a more subtle and silent way. The white Britishers do not admit openly about the racism, about the fact that they believe that the whites are superior to the blacks. They do not openly say it, but it has always been there. It has always existed. It had always existed. Finally, now it was clear to him that he was a British, but never a Briton. In the concluding part of Job Hunting, he justifies himself, saying that he was offering his service in exchange of payment. He was not asking for free will donations. He had some savings now after working at the Royal Air Force. He had enough money to survive him for 2 years, but not more than that. And he had to find a job. And he is determined to find an employer who would be more interested in his talent and skills more than the color of his skin. To Serve with Love is an autobiographical note of E.R.Braithwaite, where he openly talks about the discrimination and the prejudices that he faced as a black teacher, as a black man. And in this, he talks about how he faced discrimination and resentment and all the prejudices for being black, in spite of being highly educated, highly talented, and having high potentials. It was his skin color that stopped him from doing the best out of his life. There was a short discussion of Job Hunting by E.R.Braithwaite. I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.